key things is that we're always relating it back to the strategy, and that we're doing it in conjunction with our organizational partners. So we don't come in as consultants to tell people what we do. We come in as process consultants, which means we partner with our clients to help them understand and diagnose what changes they need and how to implement them effectively.
All those things you listed, coaching, leadership development, team. I don't know that you used the word team building, but it was something like that. Anyways, those often come under their own individual, like when we talk in HR, we'll talk about each of those individually, but we don't use this overarching idea of organization development. How does the idea of organization development add value to those activities?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to think about that it's often done in conjunction with those activities. If you want to break HR down. So, for example, you might understand that in your organization, perhaps you aren't adapting really well to change. The organization is losing its marketplace, strengthening. Maybe you don't have the knowledge and the skills required within your current workforce. So we might partner, for example, with talent acquisition and learning and development to ensure that they have identified the right types of skills to be brought into the organization and that they're developing their leaders to be able to support their employees, and that all of that's tied up with strategy. So there's a lot of overlay between some of those functions, and yet they're quite distinct as well. I think the key is really it's a big picture view, and where you're sitting back and you're really helping an organization diagnose what do they need to do in order to meet their strategies moving forward.
This is maybe an awkward question, but I'll let you, shed some insight on it. When you think about the typical HR structure, we'll have our centers of excellence. This is in a larger organization. And then we'll have some people in the field, usually the HR business partners and the HR advisors in the field. Where does organization development, if an organization has it, where does it fit or where should it fit?
Yeah, so really organization development, or sometimes it's called organization effectiveness within large organizations, really should be a function that's reporting directly into the CHRO. And at that time, too, they would be supporting the HR business partners across the organization. So, for example, let's say you've got a culture change that's required. And there isn't typically someone in HR who's responsible for culture change, but maybe you've just had 2 mergers or maybe you've had an acquisition. Well, HR certainly has the business partners within their functions, but OD might actually bring together all of those HR business partners and actually help support them around identifying what is our current state of culture? What is our future state of culture? We might do some culture assessments and then some action plans in order to move us forward from our present state to the desired future state.
It's interesting that sometimes it's called organizational effectiveness. It's really the same thing? Because you know what? I haven't done an episode on organizational effectiveness either.
Yeah, it's often an interchangeable term. And I would say it really depends on the organization.
Okay.
What's happened is over the years, HR has been promoting itself traditionally as more of a transactional model, right? So it focuses on the cores of performance management, compensation and benefits, core training development, etc. And organization development hasn't done as good a job as it should in terms of promoting itself as a profession, as skilled individuals to really align the organization strategy to diagnose and intervene in an organization around what change and interventions are required, and then to support the organization in achieving its strategic goals.
So many thoughts come to mind when you describe it that way. It seems to me that these there a few things are going on. We're always talking in HR about getting a seat at the table, and I think our seat at the table is impeded by embedding ourselves too much in the transactional and that OD is a critical part of moving ourselves. I mean, we have to do the transactional as well, but the OD is critical in providing that strategic value that's going to get us at the table and there.
Yep, absolutely agree. And that's why OD and OE are interchangeable terms, because organization is really primarily about the organization's effectiveness as well as individual and team. And if we don't have that seat at the table, if we're not tying everything to strategic objectives, then we're not really going to be providing value back to the organization that you talked about. And although there are certainly, we need absolutely functional transactional HR. I mean, everyone needs to get their payroll. The reality is OD is much bigger and it's much more systemic.
Where does the other OD, organization design, fit in?
So OD, organization design, it's one of the key elements. So when we talk about ODOE, we often see that there's a lot of key applications. So it often encompasses leadership development, culture strategy. It often encompasses organization design because, for example, maybe the organization needs to restructure due to cost cutting. Maybe an organization needs to restructure because it's growing exponentially well. Maybe there's been a merger and acquisition. So we need to redesign how many people need to be on what team, who's reporting to who, how do those departments communicate across those departments, all those types of things. Other key areas, often team effectiveness. So I don't use the word team building, by the way.
Yeah, no.
Just conjures these ropes courses and stuff.
Yeah.
It's really about embedding sustainable team development and behavior change. And OD is also really around the change required in organizations to move from their current state of diagnosis to their future desired state. So there's a lot encompassed in the whole field of OD for sure. But organization design would be one key functional aspect.
All right, that was fascinating. Getting a little bit more back to sort of the maybe academic part of the ideas that are core to organization development. Can you go over some of the core ideas or tenets of doing organizational development?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And, organization development has a couple of key tenets. And so one of those, for example, is that we are really embedded in doing things with the partners. So with our clients, whether we're internal or external.
Okay.
So we come in as process consultants, not as expert consultants. So we don't tell a client what to do. We will come in and we will support them in understanding, okay, let's contract what our roles and relationships are. Let's then move through the action research cycle, and then let's determine what are we going to do to diagnose the root causes of the issue? How are we going to collect the data? How are we going to co-design interventions to address what that data is sharing with the organization? How do we evaluate that? How do we ensure sustainability? So an action research model in doing something in partnership by process consulting is definitely one key tenet. I think another couple of things, certainly collaboration and participation. So for example, if there was an employee engagement survey, we would involve people not only across the organization, perhaps in designing that survey, but absolutely in actually developing the action plans. And ideally, each team or each division or department would have its own action plan, because we know that the more we engage others, the more that they're going to take that ownership on and actually fulfill the requirements set out by the action plan. We also have a real systemic approach to things. So this is all based on the systems thinking model. And that's realizing that whenever you create change in one part of the organization, it creates multiple parts of change throughout the organization. And we're going to need to support those changes as that ripple effect takes place. But the systems thinking is also about stepping up and having that 50,000-foot view down into the organization, so you can see how all the systems are connected and all the patterns and trends that are occurring across the organization. So it can really tie together a lot of the functional HR units, which typically operate within their own silos as well. We also have tailored interventions. So we don't, roll out, interventions. Oh, well, we have this new, intervention around change we want to share with you. We really customize it based on the information that comes out of the data analysis. So that's another key part too. Tailored interventions, but data gathering and analysis. So everything is decisions are made based on evidence, based on data being gathered. I think another key thing too is just making sure too that we have continuous communication, which would be relevant for a lot of different professions, obviously. But we also embed change management and flexibility. That would be another core tenet. And of course, making sure too that we do measure, we do evaluate and collect feedback, and we also look for sustainability of change. So that, for example, when we step away from working with our clients, they have all the knowledge and the processes transferred to them well before the process or the engagement ends. We don't want to build their reliance on us. We want to ensure that they are enabled to own and carry out interventions moving forward on their own.
Holy moly, that was a lot of stuff. But then
It's a big field. There's a lot,
what?
a lot required for sure.
Yeah, there were so many things, but I was also thinking, oh my God, she's articulating what I believe. I mean, uh, anyways, like just the collaboration, the systems thinking, the big picture, there's so much in there. Uh, you were talking about systems thinking there and this is just one of many questions I could have asked, but in systems thinking, you take this big picture view and you see how one change is going to impact another area. And in change events, if I ever hear any criticism, it's that we did not consider the downstream effect of a change we are making. But there's a million downstream effects of one change, right? So how do you decide which ones you're going to manage and which ones you don't?
Well, that's always done in consultation with the client.
Mm-hmm.
And that really comes down to you enabling the client to understand their needs, your understanding of their needs, understanding of the culture, and basically also prioritizing what are those potential scenarios that could roll out. Because you won't have the resources, as you said, to prepare for each one. And so you're going to have to prioritize that. And so I think sometimes going back and historically looking at previous changes, how have they occurred in the organization?
Yeah.
What might we expect from that? What haven't we done a good job of? What have we traditionally done a good job of? Taking a look at the current culture, and even, outside trends, what does that impact us in terms of prioritizing this change? And again, it's the client's understanding of their own system that's really important. And that's why we always work in partnership with them. It's not only to gain their buy-in, but it's to build based on their understanding.
So I know we've talked about a little bit about this along the way and you've touched on it, but can you describe some organization challenges that often warrant organization development?
For sure. So I think the first one that comes into mind is cultural misalignment. And so, do we have a clearly articulated purpose? Do we have clear values? Are we recruiting people to support those values? Are they working to create the culture that we desire? And leaders are the biggest contributors to creating the culture. So are we supporting the leaders in ensuring that they in turn are role modeling the behaviors and creating the culture that we desire? I think that's one key area. We often get brought in when there's low engagement and morale to take a look at potentially what's happening there. So often you might have, maybe it's a team intervention. Or it might be that, maybe we need to do an employee engagement survey because it's across the organization and we need to diagnose what's happening. We often get brought in for inefficient processes. So maybe there is a slowdown in processes Perhaps there's bottlenecks or increased costs. So we do have specific processes known as process reengineering, workflow optimization, et cetera, that we might
Mm-hmm.
use. Resistance to change, which we've talked about, the leadership and management issues, structural misalignment. So we alluded to that, where an organization may want people to work in teams, but they don't reward and recognize people for working in teams. Their performance management and whatnot is based on individual performance. Mergers and acquisitions, even high employee turnover might be a reason to engage an OE professional. And of course, strategy misalignment and, just resistance to change. So lots of different potential areas.
Like, what is the key to the process of doing organization development? Like, what do you have to be good at?
So if we were taking a look at skills and competencies, the Organization Development Network has its own competency framework.
Okay.
There's a whole list of skills. I mean, it's based on multiple studies, but I think first of all, we would be relationship building skills.
Oh.
So being able to build relationships with your clients, to build trust, to understand, the challenges that they're facing, to empathize with them, to be able to collaborate effectively, actively listen and ask questions to help you in the discovery process. So I think all those relationship skills are absolutely critical. I think business acumen is another key area. So understanding business strategy, understanding what metrics we can use to measure. And so how can we actually demonstrate the value of OD/OE interventions back to the organization. Data diagnosis and collection. So this one can often be a little scary to people, but really it's just about how do you collect the data? Well, are you going to use a survey? Are you going to do it by interviews? Are you going to use focus group? How do you pull together that data, that common themes? And then how do you present that data, feed it back to the client in a way that's meaningful? And then, of course, knowledge of interventions. This is a big one. And I think, as OD practitioners, as our career expands, we build knowledge on this. So if someone who's starting out isn't going to have knowledge, of appreciative inquiry, that's kind of a specialty area. So the facilitation skills, no question, that's going to be required. And then I think, even just measurement skills, sustainability skills, being able to let go, transfer the ownership back to the client, not to personally own everything. And that separation ability. And I find this one challenging, particularly when I work with a lot of my clients for a year engagement or more.
Right.
And you develop those relationships. And so you want to know, well, how are people doing? What's going on? Is this working? But eventually you have to say goodbye. You have to let the butterfly go in its own direction and move on. So I think those are some of the critical skills I would identify.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really hard when you work on something. He sort of becomes your baby and you don't want to let it go.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. There are so many questions I would ask you, but I just have a couple more. What about some trends in the OD space?
Yeah, this, I think a lot of organizations are going through this. So post-COVID, I think a lot of organizations have come out realizing that their pre-COVID strategies aren't going to work for them. There's too much change that they need to undergo. They need to be more agile. Some of them needed to change their markets. They had supply chain challenges. So I think, just even managing change at the speed of change and being able to develop strategies that are going to work to enable the organization to move forward. I think that's a critical one. I think all of us appreciate and recognize that many organizations are still struggling with the whole concept of hybrid work. Should we have, a balance around that? So that's a key area that OD is involved in. Certainly DEI, which is really critical. I went through this 30 years ago when it was really critical back then, and then it died down, unfortunately. So I'm starting to see some organization making really great progress with that. And then I'm seeing others, it's still a tick list and they're not really moving it forward. There is also data-driven OD. So this is great. We're able to make better decisions based on data being collected and also being able to report on metrics. AI, and by that, I don't mean appreciative inquiry in this case. I mean
Yeah.
AI. What is the impact? So, for example, even in coaching, we're seeing chatbots, virtual reality experiences to do coaching. Um, Resilience and well-being, that's another critical area. Mental health, there's no question. Leaders in particular are really burnt out as a general population. They're really struggling. And then, of course, we have the 5 generations in the workplace. How do we pull all of them together, to ensure that they are working well? And I think cross-functional collaboration and breaking silos is still there. I don't think we've done a good job in really addressing it. I think we've identified it for many years. There's some programs, there's some interventions around it, but we don't continually look at it. So you'll see team of teams and cross-functional leadership and boundary spanning leadership are really key topics as well.
You just gave me a tick list of things that I need to I need to interview, find someone to talk to about that and that and that and that. I've done some of it though. Okay. In organization development, final question here. What are your go-to resources if someone wants to really take on this type of thinking more, get involved in OD efforts more? What do you suggest they start reading, look at?
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, don't look at the bookcase behind me because I'm one of those people who's a continuous learner. So
Yeah.
another one in front of me too. But if I were to pick a couple of resources, organization development by Cummings and Worley, it's actually used by a lot of master's programs in OD. I think that's a good functional, kind of more of a textbook though. Flawless Consulting by Peter Block.
Really?
He's kind of one of those, he's kind of a guru.
Yeah.
Any book by Edgar Schein around process consultation or culture change, he's definitely a must read. I would also say The Fifth Discipline, Peter Senge, is also a great book to look at learning organizations.
Okay.
And appreciate that. But HBR also has a lot of good publications around teams and collaboration.
Yeah,
leadership.
maybe.
And then, of course, you've got your OD Practitioner Journal and the Change Management Journal as well.
Well, thanks, Michelle. Oh my God, that was so amazing. I felt like the angels are coming down. I know that sounds a bit crazy, but it really brought together so many thoughts for me and so many pieces of HR for me. Like, this is the connecting piece, and it's critical to the future of HR and critical in our efforts to get to the table, quote unquote. I know that's overused, but anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Thanks for listening out there once again, and we'll catch you next time when I talk with another insightful guest.